My name is Lindsay Wolker, she, hers pronouns. I am at UNC Greensboro, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Civic Learning and Democratic Engagement Knowledge Community. And this partnership is between our KC and the Fraternity and Sorority Life KC. And so we've done a few webinar series throughout the summer. We have one more coming up in July about deliberative dialogues. But one of the things that our two KCs talked about was how service and volunteer work and philanthropic engagement is one of the things that fraternities and sororities are pretty well known for, but maybe the preparation for those activities, or the reflection, or the engagement, or the ways in which they go about identifying partnerships might be some areas where there might be some room for growth, and that maybe our KC might be able to help offer some resources and some support when we're trying to talk through what does an intentional partnership look like, and how do we kind of craft those spaces for our students. And so that's the topic for today. And we are very fortunate enough to have one of our own CLDE KC leadership team members leading the discussion. And so I'll let Sarah introduce herself, and then just thanks to all of the leadership team members who are here with us today. And thanks for everybody for joining us. And we always record these sessions, so we'll send them out afterwards for folks if they couldn't make it, but I'll kick it out over to Sarah.
Hey y'all, how's it going? I'm gonna share my screen. So thanks everyone for coming. I'm excited that folks want to build some intentional partnerships in their communities. I'm Sarah Marbs. I am the Impact Program Coordinator at Gateway Technical College in Southeast Wisconsin. So I support service learning, volunteerism, and civic engagement here. I'm also the Region 4E rep for our CLDE KC. And if you joined us late, please put where you're joining us from in the chat. So we are going to talk through, I'll share what the learning objectives are. And then about half of this presentation is about preparation, because if you are really careful and thoughtful in those first steps of a relationship, it's going to be really easy and natural as you're doing the service, reflection, celebration, and maintaining the relationship. And then I'll also talk a little bit about where you might find some resources on your campus. And I'll take questions at the end, but also throughout. Feel free to drop questions or ideas in the chat, or unmute yourself and just jump in. I definitely want this to be a conversation. So what I'm hoping you take away from this is that you can work with students to identify and connect with organizations for community service or philanthropy, help them prepare and facilitate meaningful service activities, and share and celebrate student impact in the community. So we're just going to spend about 4 minutes in breakout rooms, because I want to get oriented, get thinking about service. So if you could just introduce yourself to your group and talk about a meaningful volunteer experience that you have had, and why has it stayed with you? Why did it resonate with you? And if you have a memorably bad volunteer experience, what was it and what was the problem? And that might be like, oh, it was a disaster, or it might be like, it went fine, but I didn't feel like I helped anyone. So this is open to your interpretation. So Mike's going to put us in groups, and we'll just be broken out and having conversation for about 4 minutes. All right, y'all, thanks for your conversations and coming back. I'd love to hear 2 good examples of volunteering and 2 poor examples of volunteering. I'll wait. Who's had a good volunteer experience? Yeah, Elizabeth.
Hi, this is Liz Vaughn from Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The experience I shared was an alternative break trip that I had taken. And what I found to be really meaningful about that was that I felt like I really learned a lot about the social issue, the community that we were working in. And because it was an extended, a more immersive experience, I felt like I really built relationships with the community members that we were working alongside. So both from a knowledge and a relationship perspective, that was really important. And it felt like we accomplished a meaningful amount of work as well.
That's awesome. It hit a lot of things. It was meaningful. You learned a lot. You had that extended relationship. That's a really great example. Does anyone else have a good one that they'd like to share? That's okay. Has anyone had a poor volunteer experience that has stuck with them? Well, I'm glad to hear that. It's all been smooth sailing. So we're going to talk about some steps to make sure that's the same for your students, that it's smooth sailing, that they get a lot out of it, and that they want to continue to be involved with the organization. Okay, so I mostly refer to student groups as fraternities and sororities because of our partnership today. But if you're here because you advise student groups, living learning communities, athletic teams, like this will still all be applicable to you. So before you get started with service and building these relationships, you really want to ask yourself what your objectives are, and particularly how does service fit into the organization's identity? Because there are some clubs, fraternities, sororities where that's their whole thing, is being community focused. And there's others where it's not the main identity, but it's one of their key principles. Or maybe you just have a group of students that are like, hey, this is what we want to do together. That's going to kind of direct you on what you want to do together. If you're part of a national organization, do they set priorities? Because I can think of a sorority that their focus for community service is children with diabetes. So if you have a directive like that, great, you can just go in that direction and follow their lead. But if it's up to you, or if they have a pretty broad focus, like we're focused on poverty, we're focused on working with children, then there's still a breadth of opportunities that you can explore together and narrow in on what matters to the group in particular. And then what do you want members to get out of the experience? This is going to be really important, and it can look a lot of different ways. So it might be that they just want to do something good for the community. It might be that you want to create opportunities for the group to bond together and build up as a team. And that's going to look different than if you're really just focused on the community and what their needs are. And it might be that the group has a specific skill that you want to give back to the community. Like if you have a PRSSA club, they might be wanting to do PR for nonprofits that need it. So it's about building those skills in those members. So ask yourself these 3 big questions, and that's really going to help you identify which organizations it makes sense to work with and how you can communicate them about what you want to do. If you have them, work with school resources to identify partner agencies. So you might have a community engagement office or a volunteerism office that has a list of organizations that they work with that maybe are a little bit vetted, that groups have gone to before, and so we know that they're a good environment for students. And then you also want to figure out if you want your whole group to decide what to do, or if you just maybe want your executive leadership team to decide what to do. My recommendation is that it's not like a free-for-all of like, hey, let's do service, what's interesting to the group, because then you might get ideas that aren't really attainable, or they're really good ideas, but the group doesn't have the expertise to do it. Or most importantly, getting to our next point, that it's not a community identified need. You really want to work with your community organizations or community outreach office at your school to say, what has this community said that they need, and how can we contribute to that work? Because that's how you're really going to get that meaningful opportunity where students really see the impact that they have and they've done a lot of good. And then also ask if this is a good fit for group engagement. So you might find an opportunity, and if your purpose was that you want everyone to be built up as a team, and what they need is 2 people to come every weekend to do such and such activity, it's not really going to be a match. But maybe your purpose was that you really just wanted to help this certain cause, and so okay, yeah, we're going to pick 2 people to go every weekend and do this activity. So that's going to be really important in relating back to those questions we talked about on the last slide. Is this a good fit for the engagement that we want to have? And I just have pictures of students volunteering sprinkled into this presentation, so hope you like them too. Really coach your students on the realities of a nonprofit. They might not be familiar with how nonprofits are staffed and structured. They should be ready to step outside of their comfort zones, because like at the last place where I lived, a lot of organizations were staffed by like people who just were all volunteers, they were retirees, or there was one part-time staff person, and so they just don't get to emails really quickly. And students need to be ready for that. They might have to make phone calls when they're more comfortable with email. It's going to be a good growth opportunity for the students. And with that in mind, they really need to not wait until the last minute when they're volunteering. They should be prepared to follow up and maybe nudge it up on someone's radar, because that nonprofit person's balancing a lot of different urgent tasks. And they should have some backup ideas in case it just doesn't work out. I'm just looking at the chat here. Yes, fit is really key. Yeah, that's sometimes organizations expect that, yeah, we need 20 people for this, and it really needed like 8 people, and so they're done really quick. So it's really important to talk through that with the organization beforehand. So when they do that outreach, the students should explain who they are, including the size of their group, and how they want to be involved. Like maybe there's an annual event we want to support, or we're looking to do like a weekly commitment to tutoring. Let the organization know upfront what the interest is. So now, once that connection is made, you're going to want to communicate about a few things, especially logistics. So make sure, like we were just saying, that the organization has enough work for the group to do. Be clear about if they're going to be providing all the tools that you need, other supplies, maybe safety equipment. They might assume that you have this or not. Really lay that out beforehand, who's going to be bringing what, and make sure that they have the staff to supervise you. Make sure it's accessible to your members. So if you are interested in an organization, is it walkable from campus? Is it accessible on public transit? If it's only reachable by car, know your membership. Are we going to be able to go there and participate? And then also in things like, is it ADA compliant? You might think, of course they are. It's 2022. I can tell you, my mom volunteers at a historical society, and they put in a wheelchair ramp, and the city came and said, this is a historic site, you cannot have it, so they had to take it down. So really, it's good to be upfront about those questions that you have. And this is also a time to make sure that your members are going to be safe and welcome there. And so if you have members who maybe have marginalized identities, maybe you can say upfront, hey, we're a historically Black fraternity, we're an LGBTQ club. Is this really an environment where everyone's going to be safe, welcome, and celebrated? And it's not foolproof, because some people lie to themselves about if it's a welcoming environment, but also you might be able to just get screened out and not have to deal with bigotry in person, which it's no fun to deal with via email, but better than everyone showing up and then being hassled. And then make sure the schedule is going to work, because maybe they have a program and they really need volunteers at 10 o'clock on Tuesdays. And in my experience, that's when students are in class and nobody can volunteer. So, letting them know we would really have to do this on a Saturday or an evening or whatever time works for your group, because you really have to be aligned on that. Otherwise, it just might not work out. Once you're lined up to go, please ask the members to sign up. Like when you have those specific dates, have them look at their calendar, and whether it's on a piece of paper or if it's online, have them, each member, commit to going. Otherwise, sometimes there's the case where, a community service chair of an organization says, hey, we're going to come to this service day, we'll take 20 spots, but then only 12 people can come, because realistically, everyone in, your fraternity or sorority has jobs, they have commitments at home, plus the normal things like someone got sick or their car broke down. So, even if you have really good intentions, you might leave that organization in a lurch if you don't have people proactively say, yes, I'm going to be there, and then making it a priority for themselves. You're going to want to orient students perhaps in a meeting beforehand, talk about where you're going to go, why, and what that organization does. And then you're going to want to talk to the organization about orienting the group. So that might be that day, maybe getting a tour, finding out more about how the organization operates, who they serve, how the work fits into the mission. And if that's not practical, like maybe the group wants to support Special Olympics, their spring games. And so nobody's going to have time that day to give them an orientation. Invite them to come on to one of the meetings beforehand, either in person or virtually, or maybe they have some videos that they can share. But make sure that students know what the big picture of the organization is before you go. Okay, do you have any questions, comments, concerns about preparation? This is a good pausing point.
No, just that these are great points, and thank you for pointing it out, because when you're dealing with students, dealing with a variety of students, some will remember and some will not remember. And I like the part of what you said, having a meeting, preferably like maybe the day before, with the why and the what and the where, so at least they will remember because it's a day before. So thanks for all of these pointers.
Yeah, that's a great point. The closer it is to the service event, the more hopefully it'll stick with students. It'll be fresh in their minds. Maybe they can have some. Oh, good, Lindsay. I'm going to circle back to your link on a couple slides from now with reflection.
Well, and the other preparation thing I think about also that we've run into with our students is not assuming that the students that are at your institution have not utilized the resources that they're about to go do service with. And so we've had students who were like, okay, cool, we're going to this food pantry and the soup kitchen or something. And we have a student in the group whose family regularly utilizes that service, right? Or regularly goes to that place. And so I think if you don't prepare students right, that student might be feeling some type of way by being in that space. And so how do they process through it? Or if another student hears oh, your family uses this, what is that about? They might have some questions and they might have some reactions to it. And so I think there's a lot of prep work that needs to happen in order to create those effective partnerships in the community, in order to help your students. Because who's benefiting here? That's another question that you need to ask yourself. Is this for the students or is this for the community? Because sometimes those are very different reactions and very different learning opportunities. And so I think you have to be real about the intention behind it, which I think Sarah talked about in the beginning. But yeah, that's just something that has come to mind a lot with the students at UNCG.
Yeah, you definitely want to be sensitive. And I think hopefully as you're building these lasting partnerships, that helps your students understand the people being served and how the community shapes the issue that they're addressing, and makes it less oh, we're here to help these people who need us, because they actually have an understanding of oh, this is a systemic issue and such, they have their understanding will make it more fulfilling for them, but also just better community members and appreciate that service for, they might need it someday too, is another thing to consider. If they haven't already. So thank you for that. So when you are completing your community, or when the group is completing their community service, I would definitely encourage students to ask a lot of questions and learn as much as possible, because this is a great insight into the community. Be patient and flexible. So hopefully you've prepped them to understand that nonprofits are often on tight budgets and they have limited staff. I'm going to give you an example. We had a service day at my last job planned at a Boys and Girls Club, and it was going to be on a Saturday. And that Monday before, one of our senators called their office and was like, hey, so Senator so-and-so wants to come and do a photo op and bring their staff to do some volunteering. And they were like, okay. So they gave the senator our service project. So they still had stuff for us to do that Saturday, but there was a lot more of this little project here, we're going to set up really quick and we need some time to set up between projects. So have students be ready to be patient and flexible, because the nonprofits are definitely grateful for the help, but they have limited bandwidth. So their preparation might be limited as well. And commit to doing a good job. I think students are usually good about this, but every once in a while you definitely see students who are just kind of half-heartedly sloppily painting, or I'm gonna go get some water, and they come back 45 minutes later. And so the way that you're going to get all these bullet points on this slide done and fulfilled basically is if you have your executive leadership team of that organization commit to role modeling this. So, you know, your chapter president, your community service chair needs to be curious and interested. They need to demonstrate being patient and having a good attitude if we have to wait 15 minutes between this project and that project. And calling people out and being excited about doing a good job if folks are not necessarily doing that. I'm going to keep up with the chat as we go. Yeah, that's a great point. So Lindsay had said, remind students that doing something can just be like listening to someone. And it's not always like, oh, I painted this community service center. It might just be that I worked with someone who didn't have anything to do this morning and nobody's come visit them for a while. Or, you know, I'm just role modeling what it's like to be a college student, and someone who looks like this kid can be a college student. And now they, you know, they've gotten to know me and they know what could be in their future. So yeah, service looks like a lot of different things. And so we should definitely prepare our students for recognizing their impact, no matter what form that takes. Which cues us up beautifully for reflection. Reflection can be done at the end of the day, or it can be at a meeting shortly after your service activity. And what I mean by reflection is that it's a conversation or some other kind of activity that helps participants recognize their learning and the impact that they had. So Lindsay put in the chat a great resource for reflection. And if you Google like service learning and reflection, you'll get all kinds of great ideas, because if your group is really creative, like you can do art reflections, music, or journaling, but I think typically it could be conversation. And some questions to get you thinking about reflection is you might prompt members with like, what did you learn? What surprised you? What was challenging? Were you familiar with this organization or this community issue beforehand? What did you already know, and how so? And then in your day-to-day life, are you perpetuating or addressing this community issue? I hope I went backwards. And it really can be like, those are just like a few questions. You can reflect in so many different ways with so many different questions, but I would recommend trying to hit on people's feelings about what they did, the learning or growth that they achieved, helping them recognize their personal impact and their self-efficacy in addressing community issues, and having a little bit of a broader understanding of whatever the issue is that that organization is addressing. Yes. Yeah, I definitely, Lindsay put a link, and she also recommended the what, so what, now what model. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Lindsay?
Sorry, I'm blowing up the chat, Sarah.
Oh, I love it.
But I'm just trying to put some resources in there while we go. But yeah, I mean, the what, so what, now what model, really, really simple reflection model, and you can make it as complicated or easy as you want it to be. So it's essentially like, what happened, so what because it happened, and now what because it happened, right? So like your students are coming back from service and they're saying, what happened? Like what did we do, or what did we experience, or what did we whatever, then what comes of that? So what did we learn from that, or how do we feel about that, or like, so what are we going to do because of that? And then the now what, again, that kind of goes into the action piece of like, so now what? You did this thing, so do you go on with your day and you never think about this issue again? Or like, are you now a hunger champion and you want to start a food pantry on your campus? Like, what are you going to do with this? And it's okay if it's just, I'm going to think about this more, or I'm going to look up organizations, right? Like, they don't need to be changing the world after a day of service, right? But we want them to be at least thinking about like where they sit with it, and like how this impacts their community, their students, their families, whatever, even if it's just reflecting, that's okay. But yeah, that model is just, there's tons of resources online, but that's just a kind of a go-to entry level reflection model if you're looking to kind of integrate some like easy questions with your students.
Thank you for that. And you can also do a little bit of an assessment with the group. Like, did we find this work meaningful? Was it a good use of our time? Did everyone feel safe and respected when we were here? And that's going to inform your big question in terms of the partnership of, do we want to do more with this organization? Celebration is also a part of service. So take photos as much as is allowed with the organization. Make sure to ask your host, because if you're out pulling invasive species, it's going to be just fine. And if you're working with people, you're going to be pretty limited. So they can either tell you, no photos, or like, yeah, these 2 people have waivers, so let's just take some photos with them. And then you can share that on your social media or in newsletters. Please keep track of the impact that your group does, and that can be hours served, but also really specifically the things that you did, like we picked up X number of bags of trash, we served this many people, we built this many miles of trail. Really keep note of that impact, and then that's something you can celebrate with the group as you're going along, but also at the end of the year. And share details with your school and national organization, because maybe they'll also share your posts or spotlight you in a newsletter or something like that. Oops, I keep going backwards. In order to maintain the relationship, as you're getting involved with another organization, the group should decide their commitments and then communicate that with that community organization. So whether that's, yeah, we want to do this once a year event every year, that's okay. Or we had a really great time. How can we get involved in an ongoing basis? Or let's start recruiting weekly tutors. Like, there's no one size fits all. So whatever makes sense for the group, work with that organization to keep it going. Keep up to date by following each other on social media, newsletters, keeping in touch. And as your organization has leadership turnover at the beginning of the year, or the beginning of the school year, provide an introduction to your point person at the nonprofits that you work with, so that they're up to date about who to be in touch with. So what we got going on here? How did I know it would be Lindsay in the chat? Yeah, I think if there's going to be an ongoing relationship, an MOU can be really valuable. Do you have any examples of times when that's been really useful, Lindsay? Or
yeah, we have a leadership program where students do service for a year. It spans a year long. And so they work together on a project management plan at the jump. And so they establish collective goals. They talk about what success would look like. They talk about the history of the organization. They talk about how many hours they're going to put in, what days of the week they're going to be there, how they're going to recruit people. So like it goes, I mean, we took it from, I think, like a business project management plan template and made it kind of more community focused, but it really helps lay out like how are we going to communicate with one another? Because let me tell you, number one hurdle for most community partnerships and students is communication. Are you okay with texting? Are we going to email each other? How often are we going to check in? Like those sorts of things. It's really helpful at the beginning to kind of clarify how you're going to do that. And the formalized way of creating a plan to do that helps reference back when expectations are not being met, which, can happen, right? For a whole lot of reasons, but it's just helpful to have a place to go back to of like, okay, well, this is what we agreed on. So like, do we need to shift it? Or like, what conversations do we need to have? Because it's a whole lot harder to go in halfway through the project and being like, we're not even on the same page at all. We probably should have talked about that, right? And so it's good to just establish, especially like we're talking about if it's a sustained kind of longer partnership.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I want to help you find your own resources on your own campus. So if you have an office focused on volunteerism, they're going to be really great. They know where students have gone. They might know places where students have had good or bad experiences that they can refer you to. And I would say, even if you have an office that isn't focused on the co-curricular side, but is more about service learning, you can still ask them, because they have a list of partners that they work with. And they might have recommendations, or, such and such organization wanted to do X with us. It didn't fit with a class, but maybe your group can now fill in that need that we heard about. So even if they're not necessarily, even if they seem really focused on academics, I would still use them as a resource if you can. They also might have done some vetting, like making sure they have insurance, or they might have MOUs just in general. So try to make the most if you have that on campus. And they also might have a tool for finding organizations, like if your schools work with Galaxy Digital or Give Pulse, nonprofits can post their own volunteer needs, and so you can browse there. And if your school doesn't have that, see if there's a United Way or a community volunteer center, because they will also often have these volunteer portals where you can search through needs online, and there's all kinds of great filters like by location or dates that they need help that can be really useful when you're finding a match for a group. I would also, if you really want to help your students find out if your volunteer hours can count for multiple programs. So maybe the hours I do with my sorority can count towards the hours required for the honors program or the scholarship that I'm getting, and see where students can get credit for a few different requirements that they have. Oh, I don't know why that keeps happening. Okay, so that's really what I wanted to share with you all. Did you have questions that I didn't talk about, or your own anecdotes where you were like, this happened to me and I learned so much? Yes, double dipping, so useful. I think the only time I've heard a no for the double dipping is like, if it's a service learning course, then often it can't count for your honors program or anything, but all those co-curricular things, usually you can double up on them.
One of the things that we initially struggled with early on was a number of our organizations allow for, like, if I donate X number of money, it equals this many hours. And so we had to, initially we struggled with that a little bit to kind of help them understand, like, that's great for your chapter if that's what you want to do, but for the university, it has to be like actual physical, hands-on something, right? And not just, oh, I gave $100, therefore that counts as this many hours. So we had to set down that criteria for them. But I mean, within less than a year, they were like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, and they adjusted pretty quickly.
I've had that same thing actually, and it was also with giving blood. Reduced the number of hours you had to do for the honors program by 2 hours, but students would like log 2 hours of giving blood, and I'm like, that's just for honors. You didn't volunteer for 2 hours. So but like you said, once you kind of got that message out there, then the next year it's kind of embedded in everyone, so it's easy to change. Cool. Other questions? Yeah, Carrie.
Can you hear me? Okay, actually, like, kind of going with what both of you were talking about, Christopher and Sarah, as the whole thing that needs to be understood is that there is a difference in between community service and philanthropy. And so the thing is that, like, I've never been the hugest fan of, like, okay, yeah, here's $100, this equals out to this much. There needs to be a cap on that, because of the fact, like, if somebody's just going to pay their way through it completely and it's okay that way, that's not quite right. They need to put the work in and realize that there is that difference. Like, so there was one place that I worked before that they had with they call it the 4 pillars, which most fraternity and sorority life offices have and stuff like that. Like, it had, like scholarship, whatever else, but one just had philanthropy. Didn't speak about community service at all. It's like, you understand those are 2 different things. Like, no, they're not. Yes, they are in a big way. One's monetary, one's not. Pretty much, you just cut it that way. Like, so there, once again, biggest thing, there just needs to be a cap, in my opinion, on how much somebody can go ahead and provide and stuff, so that they actually do actual community service.
Yeah, I think it's also important to think about like the time of year that you're doing said service. And so I always tend to go back, because I see a lot of our fraternities and sororities doing food drives, because I mean, that's a good thing to do, right? And so, like, however, I think if you do it by weight and everybody brings 15 bags of rice, like, that's not the greatest resource probably for that food bank. But I think about, like, so Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week, National Week happens in November, everyone does big things, right? But people are hungry all year round, right? And so, like, maybe right before the school year ends, where K through 12 students are now utilizing food banks at higher rates because they're not being fed in school, maybe that could be a good time to do like a food drive towards the end of the year, where a food bank might be a little lower on resources because it's not one of those cool times of year where it's cool to do a food drive, right? And so, like, I think it's also educating your students again on like the needs in your community and like when those ebb and flow times of year may be, where it might be a cool thing to like plug in to a time where they're not being inundated, but they also need resources other times of year, where you know, a large group, because that's the thing that I really appreciate about fraternities and sororities is, and like student orgs and everything, they have numbers, they have power. And so like they can get a big group together, they can get big numbers together, they can get big donations together. And so how are you using that power, that influence, those bodies to do good work in your community that's needed at a really, really crucial time that might not be a time that they might necessarily naturally think of all the time.
That's a great point. Elizabeth asked if anyone has a success story about helping a chapter incorporate service into an existing philanthropic relationship that they have. I think it sometimes depends on that organization that you have that philanthropic relationship with. I can think of students who have participated in like the polar plunge for Special Olympics, and then I've nudged them to actually like go volunteer for the spring games or for like their mailings or help them with mailings and stuff. So I think it can be done, but I don't have any special like heartwarming anecdote to share with you. Anyone? Yeah, Carrie.
There we go. Okay. Actually, one of the things that I had at the first place that I did my graduate assistantship at is that at first they were really big into throwing money at when it came to cleaning up the university. They would just go ahead and do that, But what happened is that all of a sudden I met with them, and one of the current that they had, it was I forget the organizations. It was Pi Kappa Phi, Zeta Phi Beta, Sorority Incorporated, and Pi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. And what happened is that they end up figuring out they had the one thing that's in common with them is the shade of blue or the color blue. So, and they have multiple things with them, but they thought about that. And so they started doing community service work and started calling themselves 3 Shades of Blue, which was great. And so the people, instead of, looking at, or even people in the organizations, they stopped worrying about just throwing money. They wanted to do that community service work because they found that as just as fulfilling, if not, and then also they found it as more fulfilling. Well, the thing is that even another organization that also had the color of blue, actually has double blue, Kappa Kappa Gamma, they wanted to get involved with it as well. So they changed it from 3 Shades of Blue to 4 Shades of Blue, because of that. And actually like other organizations started catching on with a lot of other people because of the fact that they saw that, in truth, community service is more rewarding. It can be more rewarding than just the philanthropic piece.
This is not related, but it's something I forgot to say during my presentation. And this is my hot tip for student groups. If you are trying to build camaraderie with your service, do some monotonous labor. And if you're trying to build warm, fuzzy memories that they will associate with your organization, serve people or animals. Because if you're trying to make everyone grow as friends and stuff, pulling invasive species, picking up litter, I've had some of the funniest conversations of my life, like just pulling invasive species, because your mind is free to do anything and the conversation can go anywhere. But if you're more focused on that, I want them to, because really if you're a fraternity or sorority, you're building your future like donor base and everything, and you want them to have these moments of like, hey, participating in this made me a better person, and I know I had this impact. Then you might want to go work with people, adults, older people, children, animals, so that they have these special connections that they've built that they associate with your organization. Other questions or anecdotes? Cool. I don't know if we have any CLDE pitches for people before we part ways.
Well, the only other thing that I was thinking about, so we also do like democratic and civic engagement. And I think about like the Divine Nine and like the work that they do around voter engagement. And I think about like, yes, that's different than community engagement, but like that's a united front that's moving an issue forward. And so I wonder about like some chapters who are like partnering with chapters on other campuses who are like uniting behind a cause to like be known for that cause. And so like, if that's something that, you know, a Ronald McDonald House or a Make-A-Wish or like these large organizations or even smaller organizations in your communities, like if you are, again, like bringing a constituent group consistently together, that may help kind of incorporate into a sustaining partnership. Because like, if I think about like fraternities and sororities with voter education, I immediately think of the Divine Nine and like the work that they do around getting out the voting, like why it's important to vote, right? And so like, what is that thing that your chapter is known for? Is there a larger philanthropic partner that they have? Is there a connection that they have? Is there an alumni connection? Is there something there that can like tap into when it comes to developing some of those sustaining partnerships? I think the only plug that we have is that, so, and I'm trying to look on my calendar real quick. So deliberative dialogue, if you are interested in incorporating that into your fraternity, sorority chapters, or just learning more about dialogue programs, we have somebody from the Sustained Dialogue Institute out of Washington, D.C. Is speaking at our July event, July 26th. I saw Mike put the registration in there. She's wonderful. She trained our campus and a bunch of other campuses on integrating sustained dialogue into the work that we do. It's a high impact practice for all students, and we all know we need it right now about talking across difference and how students can gain those skills. So if you're interested in incorporating that into your campuses, I encourage you to join us for our next webinar on the 26th at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And the recording of this will be available. If anybody has any resources that they want us to share out with that, please send Casey an email, and I'm going to try to put it into the chat right now. Is that right, Mike? Is that our right email?
NASPA CLD, Casey.
Oh, NASPA CLD, Casey. Got it. But yeah, other than that, I think we're good. Thank you, Sarah, so much for sharing some expertise with us and kind of helping think through these partnerships that I know we all want to make meaningful and impactful for our students and our community partners. So we appreciate y'all being here, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.